The year was 2847, and humanity had spent 300 years living as slaves to the Empire. When the alien ships first appeared in Earth's sky back in 2501, humans had no choice but to surrender. They were powerful beyond imagination. Their warships were 3 kilometers long and could destroy entire cities with a single blast. Humanity had nothing to fight back with, so they kneeled. They bowed. They accepted their place at the bottom of the galactic food chain. Admiral Jack stood alone on the observation deck of Outpost Sentinel. This was Earth's largest space station that the aliens knew about. He was 57 years old with gray hair and deep lines on his face. Those lines came from years of pretending to be weak when every part of him wanted to fight. He watched the inspection shuttle leave the station and disappear into the darkness of space. Commander Kate walked up beside him. She was his second in command, and one of the few people who knew the truth about what humanity was really doing. She had red hair tied back in a tight bun and green eyes that never showed fear even when she stood before alien overlords. Another inspection passed, she said quietly. The delegate counted our ships and seemed happy with what he found. Jack let out a small bitter laugh. 12 patrol frigates per year. That was all they allowed humanity to build. Enough to police their own solar system, but never enough to be a threat. The aliens wanted humans to have just enough power to manage themselves, but not enough to ever dream of freedom. What they did not know was that the patrol frigates were a lie. They were a show put on for the inspectors. For 200 years, humanity had been running the greatest deception in the history of the galaxy. Every smile they gave to alien visitors was fake. Every bow was an act. Behind the mask of submission, humans were building something that would change everything. Deep inside the frozen moon of Triton, far from any alien sensors, Director Laura walked through secret corridors carved from ice and stone. She was 45 years old with short dark hair and the kind of calm, steady presence that made people trust her completely. She had dedicated her entire life to Project Colossus, and she had never once regretted that choice. Thousands of workers moved through the massive underground facility. Engineers checked systems. Welders joined metal plates together. Scientists ran calculations on screens that glowed blue in the dim light. All of them worked in absolute secrecy. None of them had seen Earth in years. Many of them would never see it again. This was the price of freedom. Laura stopped at an observation window and looked out at the construction bay. What she saw still took her breath away even after all these years. A ship so large that it made no sense. A vessel that measured 8,000 kilometers across, bigger than Earth itself. A weapon that could crack planets and tear fleets apart like they were made of paper. Her chief engineer walked up beside her. His name was Daniel, and he was the person Laura had ever met. He was thin and tired, looking with glasses that he constantly pushed up his nose. He had not slept properly in months, but his eyes still burned with determination. Leviathan 7 is almost ready, he said. Hull integrity is at 94%. Weapons systems will be complete in 6 months. She will join her sisters soon. Laura nodded slowly. Leviathan 7 was the 7th planet-sized warship that humanity had built in secret. 6 others already waited in the darkness between stars. They were hidden in places no alien would ever think to look. Inside hollowed asteroids, within the crushing atmospheres of gas giants, in pockets of folded space that human scientists had learned to create. The deception had started 200 years ago with Admiral Grace. She was the one who first suggested that humanity stop trying to fight openly and start playing the long game. She knew they could not win a direct war against the aliens were too strong and too advanced. But she also knew that strength was not the only path to victory. Sometimes the weak could defeat the strong simply by being patient. Grace died before a single Leviathan was completed, but her dream lived on. Generation after generation of humans played their role perfectly. They paid their taxes to the Empire. They submitted to inspections without complaint. They smiled and bowed when alien dignitaries visited Earth. They pretended to be grateful for the privilege of being allowed to exist. And in the shadows, they built weapons that would shake the foundations of the galaxy. They never suspected anything because they could not imagine it. They had ruled the galaxy for 50,000 years. They had crushed countless species and absorbed dozens of empires. In all that time, no one had ever dared to deceive them on this scale. They saw humans as weak and broken and pathetic. They saw what they expected to see. Jack often thought about what the aliens would feel when they finally learned the truth. Would they be angry or afraid or simply confused? He hoped they would be afraid. He wanted them to know the same fear that humanity had felt for 3 centuries. He wanted them to understand that their arrogance had been their greatest weakness. Kate stood beside him on the observation deck as the stars turned slowly outside the window. She knew what he was thinking because she thought about it too. Every human who knew the secret thought about it. The day when they would stop pretending. The day when the masks would come off and the galaxy would see what humanity had become. That day was coming soon. Laura could feel it in her bones as she watched the construction crews work on Leviathan 7. Daniel could feel it in the numbers that flowed across his screens. Jack could feel it every time he bowed to an inspector while hiding the fire that burned in his heart. 200 years of patience, 200 years of sacrifice, 200 years of building weapons in the dark while pretending to be helpless. The galaxy had no idea what was coming. The Empire had no idea that the species they dismissed as weak and broken had been preparing for war since before their current leaders were born. They could not imagine that the quiet humans with their small patrol frigates and their empty smiles had created something beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen. But they would learn. Soon they would all learn. And when that day came, nothing would ever be the same again. Humanity had waited long enough. The quiet years were almost over. The High Council met on their prime. It was a planet of tall silver towers that stretched toward a sky that was always dark. They did not like bright light. They were reptilian creatures with thick scales and cold yellow eyes that could see perfectly in the shadows. Their leader was Supreme Arbiter, and he was the most powerful being in the known galaxy. Stood at the center of the council chamber. He was taller than the others with scales of deep crimson that marked him as royalty. His voice echoed off the walls as he spoke to the assembled delegates. "The humans have become too comfortable," he declared. "Their population grows faster than we allowed. Their industry expands beyond acceptable limits. It is time to remind them of their place in the order of things." The other council members nodded in agreement. This was how they maintained control over their empire. When a tributary species started to grow too confident, they would cut them back down. Sometimes this meant taking their resources. Sometimes it meant reducing their numbers. They did not see this as cruel. They saw it as necessary, like trimming a plant to keep it from growing wild. A message was sent across the stars to Earth. It traveled through quantum links that could carry information faster than light. Within minutes, it arrived at the desk of President Cole. Was a calm man with a soft voice and gentle manner. They had approved his election because they thought he was weak. They thought he would be easy to control. What they did not know was that Cole had been chosen specifically because he could appear weak while hiding a will made of iron. He was the perfect leader for a species that had been pretending for 200 years. Secretary of Defense Amy Porter stood beside him as he read the message. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and a quick mind. Her hands trembled slightly as she listened to read the words aloud. The Empire demands a 50% reduction in human population within 10 standard years. All remaining humans will be relocated to designated colony worlds. Earth will be converted into an administrative center. Failure to comply will result in immediate military action. Amy felt sick. 50% reduction meant the death of billions of people. It meant genocide dressed up in polite diplomatic language. They were not asking humanity to sacrifice. They were demanding that humanity accept its own destruction. set the message down on his desk. His face showed nothing but calm acceptance. This was another part of the act. There were always ears listening, always eyes watching. Even in the presidential office, they could never be certain they were truly alone. He looked toward the shadows at the far end of the room. Admiral Jack stepped forward into the light. Kate followed close behind him. They had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. "Is it time?" asked quietly. Jack allowed himself to smile. It was the first real smile he had shown in years. "We have 9 completed vessels," he said. 3 more are almost finished. We have over 600 billion humans living in hidden colonies that they have never found. We have weapons they cannot imagine and ships they cannot comprehend." He paused and looked the president directly in the eyes. "Yes, sir, it is time." That night, a coded signal was sent from Earth to the frozen moon of Triton. Laura received it in her office deep beneath the surface. Her hands were steady as she entered the activation sequence into her console. She had practiced this moment 1,000 times in her mind. Now it was real. Across the galaxy, hidden ships began to wake up. Power systems that had been dormant for decades came online. Engines that had never been tested at full capacity roared to life. Weapons that existed only in classified documents became real and ready. The Leviathans stirred in their hiding places. Old Terra, the first and largest of them all, powered up in the cloud at the edge of the solar system. Her crew of 50,000 officers and soldiers moved to their stations. Captain Chris Palmer stood on a bridge larger than most space stations and watched as his ship prepared for war. Commander Torres was his executive officer. She was young for such an important position, but she had earned it through skill and dedication. She read the status reports as they came in from every section of the massive vessel. "All systems are online," she reported. "Weapons are charged. Shields are at full power. We are ready to move on your command." Chris nodded slowly. He thought about all the generations of humans who had worked and sacrificed to make this moment possible. He thought about the children who had grown up in secret colonies, never knowing the blue sky of Earth. He thought about the engineers who had died building these ships, their bodies buried in unmarked graves on frozen moons. "Take us out," he ordered. "It is time humanity stopped hiding." On Prime, the High Council celebrated. They believed they had finally solved the human problem. In a few years, Earth would be theirs, and the annoying little species that had somehow survived for 3 centuries would be reduced to a manageable number. Everything was going according to plan. Supreme Arbiter retired to his private chambers feeling satisfied. He had ruled the Empire for 200 years, and he had never once faced a challenge he could not overcome. The humans would submit like they always did. They would cry and beg and eventually accept their fate. This was how things worked in the galaxy. He did not know that far away in the darkness of space, something massive was moving. Something that would change everything he believed about power and control and the natural order of things. Something that would make him feel fear for the first time in his long and terrible life. Laura stood at her observation window and watched as the last construction crews evacuated from Leviathan 7. The ship was not quite finished, but it would have to be enough. They could complete the final work later. Right now, what mattered was getting every available weapon into position. She thought about Grace, the admiral who had started all of this 200 years ago. Grace had known she would never see the results of her plan. She had accepted that her entire life would be spent preparing for a war she would never fight. But she had done it anyway because she believed in something larger than herself. Now her dream was about to become reality. The quiet years were over. The time for pretending was finished. Humanity was about to show the galaxy what they had been doing in the shadows while everyone thought they were weak and broken. Laura whispered a quiet thank you to all the ghosts who had made this possible. Then she turned away from the window and walked toward the command center. There was work to do and a war to win. Captain Chris Palmer had spent his entire adult life preparing for this moment. He was born on a hidden colony world that no alien had ever visited. He grew up knowing that one day he would command a ship larger than anything the galaxy had ever seen. Every test he took, and every simulation he ran had been building toward this single point in time. Now he stood on the bridge of Leviathan 1 and watched as the greatest secret in human history prepared to reveal itself. The bridge was enormous. It stretched out in every direction with hundreds of stations arranged in careful circles. 300 officers worked at screens and consoles, managing the countless systems required to operate a vessel the size of a small planet. Commander Torres moved between stations checking reports and confirming that everything was ready. She was calm and efficient even though her heart was racing. This was the moment they had trained for. This was the moment that would change everything. "All stations report ready," she announced. "Navigation systems are online. Weapons are charged and standing by. Shield generators are at full capacity. We can begin emergence on your order." Chris took a deep breath. He thought about his parents who had worked in the construction yards of Triton. He thought about his teachers who had prepared him for command. He thought about all the humans across the galaxy who were counting on him to get this right. "Take us out," he ordered. "Show them what we have built." The asteroid that had hidden old Terra for decades began to crack and split apart. The ship inside was so massive that her emergence looked like a moon being born from stone. Hull plates that measured hundreds of kilometers across caught the distant light of the sun. Weapon arrays extended from ports that could have swallowed cities whole. Engine systems that burned with the power of captured stars pushed the great vessel forward into open space. The process took hours. A ship the size of old Terra could not simply appear. She unfolded slowly like a metal flower opening its petals to the light. Layer after layer of armor and systems became visible as she pulled free from her hiding place. The asteroid that had concealed her crumbled into dust behind her. At the edge of human space, a patrol fleet detected the emergence. Commander Vex of the battle cruiser Blade stared at his sensor screens with growing disbelief. He had served the Empire for 200 years. He had seen countless battles and witnessed the destruction of entire worlds. Nothing in his experience had prepared him for what his instruments were telling him. "Run the calculations again," he ordered his sensor officer. "We have Commander, 7 times. The readings are accurate." Vex looked at the numbers and felt something cold spreading through his body. The object emerging from human space was approximately 8,000 kilometers in diameter. It was generating an energy signature equivalent to a small star. It was accelerating toward his position at speeds that should have been impossible for something so large. "What is that thing?" one of his officers whispered. Vex did not answer. He could not answer. His mind simply refused to accept what he was seeing. The humans were supposed to be weak. They were supposed to have nothing but patrol frigates and outdated cargo ships. They were not supposed to have anything like this. He finally found his voice and gave the only order that made sense. "Contact High Command," he said. "Tell them the humans have been hiding something. Then get us out of here at maximum speed." The patrol fleet turned and ran. 12 warships that had terrorized human space for generations fled like frightened animals before a predator they could not comprehend. They did not fire a single shot. They did not even consider fighting. One look at their sensor readings told them that engagement would mean instant death. Old Terra did not pursue them. She did not need to. Her mere presence had achieved the first objective. The now knew that everything they believed about humanity was wrong. On the bridge, Chris Palmer watched the alien ships disappear into the distance. Tor stood beside him with a smile on her face that she could not suppress. "They ran," she said quietly. "The mighty Empire took one look at us and ran." Chris nodded. This was only the beginning. Word would spread quickly across the galaxy. Every species that had ever bowed to the would hear about what happened today. Every slave and tributary and conquered people would learn that the weak little humans had been building something terrifying in secret. More importantly, the High Council would learn. Supreme Arbiter would see the censor recordings and understand that his ultimatum had been a terrible mistake. He would realize that the species he planned to destroy had the power to destroy him instead. "Bring the other ships into formation," Chris ordered. "It is time for the galaxy to see what humanity has become." Across the solar system and beyond, 8 more Leviathan-class warships emerged from their hiding places. They rose from asteroid fields and gas giant atmospheres. They unfolded from pockets of twisted space that human scientists had learned to create. One by one, they took their positions in a great crescent formation around Earth's sun. 9 planet-sized warships bristling with weapons that could tear reality apart. 9 monuments to human patience and determination. 9 nightmares made real for every species that had ever thought humanity was too weak to matter. Admiral Jack watched from his command center on Earth as the ships moved into position. Kate stood at his side with tears in her eyes. Laura watched from Triton with Daniel and the thousands of workers who had made this possible. "We did it," Laura whispered. "After all these years, we actually did it." Daniel adjusted his glasses and smiled. "We built weapons that will make the galaxy tremble. Now let us see if we have the courage to use them." On Prime, the censor recordings arrived at the High Council chamber. Supreme Arbiter watched in silence as the images played across the great screen. He saw the human ships emerging from hiding. He saw their impossible size and terrifying power. He saw everything he thought he knew about the galaxy crumbling into dust. For the first time in 200 years of absolute rule, he had no idea what to do. The humans had deceived everyone. They had built an armada that could challenge the entire fleet, and they had done it while smiling and bowing and pretending to be helpless. Felt something he had not experienced since he was a hatchling. He felt afraid. Supreme Arbiter refused to accept defeat. He had ruled the galaxy for 200 years, and he would not let a species of weaklings embarrass him. The humans had built large ships, but size was not everything. They had numbers and experience and the fury of an empire that had never lost a war. He sent orders to every corner of space. Every warship that could fly was to gather at Prime. Every soldier that could fight was to prepare for battle. The Empire would crush this human arrogance with overwhelming force. They would reduce those massive ships to scrap metal and remind the galaxy who truly held power. The fleet that assembled was the largest in history. 4,000 dreadnoughts, each one 3 kilometers long and armed with weapons that could crack planets. 12,000 battlecruisers filled with soldiers eager for glory. Countless support vessels carrying supplies and reinforcements. It was a force that had conquered empires and destroyed civilizations. It was a force that had never known defeat. Stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched the armada take formation around him. His scales had returned to their deep crimson color. His confidence had returned with it. Numbers mattered in war. The humans had 9 ships, no matter how large. He had 16,000. "We will teach them the price of defiance," he declared. "We will make them beg for the mercy they rejected." The fleet entered faster than light travel and crossed the vast distance to human space in a matter of days. They expected to find the human ships waiting near Earth. They expected a battle that would be difficult but winnable. They expected to write another chapter in the long history of dominance. What they found instead was 9 nightmares arranged in perfect formation. The Leviathan-class warships hung in space like ancient gods awakened from myth. Their hulls gleamed in the light of the sun they had sworn to protect. Their weapons were charged and ready. Their crews were calm and prepared. Admiral Jack commanded the human fleet from Old Terra's bridge. Laura had come aboard to serve as his operations officer. She wanted to see the results of her life's work with her own eyes. Kate commanded Leviathan 3 from a position on the left flank. Chris Palmer had transferred to Leviathan 7, the ship in the formation. "They are arriving," Tors reported from her station. 16,000 vessels. They are moving into attack formation." Jack nodded slowly. He had expected something like this. They could not accept what the humans had done. Their pride would not allow them to negotiate or retreat. They had to fight. They had to prove that they were still the masters of the galaxy. He almost felt sorry for them. "Let them come," he ordered. "Show them what human engineering truly looks like." The battle began when the first dreadnought fired its main cannon. It was a weapon designed to destroy moons. The beam of concentrated energy crossed the distance between the fleets in less than a second. It struck the shields of Leviathan 1 and disappeared completely. The massive ship did not even shudder. Her defensive systems absorbed the attack like it was nothing. Watched from his flagship with disbelief. That cannon had destroyed planets. It had shattered defensive stations and torn through fleets. Against the human ship it had done nothing at all. "Fire again," he screamed. "All ships fire everything." 16,000 warships opened fire at once. The space between the fleets filled with beams and missiles and projectiles. It was the most concentrated attack in galactic history. Enough firepower to sterilize entire star systems poured toward the 9 human vessels. The Leviathans absorbed it all. Their shields flickered and glowed but held firm. The technology that humanity had developed over 2 centuries was beyond anything they had ever faced. Every defensive system had been designed specifically to counter weapons. Every hull plate had been reinforced to withstand attacks. Then the humans fired back. Each Leviathan carried weapons that normal classification. Mass drivers launched projectiles the size of buildings at speeds close to light itself. Energy beams powered by fusion reactions that burned like small stars cut through space. Missile systems deployed thousands of warheads that moved with perfect precision toward their targets. And there was something else, something they had never encountered before: dimensional shearing technology, weapons that reached into the fabric of reality itself and tore it apart. The first dreadnought simply ceased to exist. One moment it was there. The next moment it was being pulled into 17 different dimensional planes at once. Its hull stretched and twisted in ways that made no physical sense. Then it was gone, not destroyed, not damaged, simply erased from existence. The second dreadnought lasted 2 seconds longer. The third never had time to fire a second shot. The fourth and fifth and sixth disappeared in rapid succession as the human weapons found their targets with terrible accuracy. Watched his fleet dying around him. Ships that had taken years to build were vanishing in seconds. Officers who had served him for decades were being wiped from existence. Everything he had brought to this battle was being consumed by weapons he could not understand. "Retreat," he finally ordered. "All ships retreat." But it was too late for retreat. The Leviathans had surrounded the fleet. Their weapons continued to fire with mechanical precision. Each shot removed another warship from reality. Each passing minute reduced the greatest armada in galactic history by hundreds of vessels. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it was over, 4,000 dreadnoughts and 12,000 battlecruisers had been reduced to nothing. Not debris, not wreckage, nothing. The dimensional shearing weapons left no trace of what they destroyed. Not a single Leviathan had suffered significant damage. A few shield generators had been stressed. A few hull plates showed minor scoring. Nothing that could not be repaired in a matter of days. Jack stood on the bridge of Old Terra and looked at the empty space where the fleet had been. He felt no joy. He felt no triumph. He only felt tired. 300 years of oppression had ended today. The species that had forced humanity to kneel was broken. The empire that had demanded their destruction was defeated. Kate contacted him from Leviathan 3. Her voice was quiet and steady. "It is done," she said. "The fleet is gone." Jack nodded even though she could not see him. "Yes. Now comes the hard part. Now we have to build something better than what came before." on his flagship had watched until the end. He was one of the few who survived. His ship had been damaged but not destroyed. He had ordered a desperate jump to faster-than-light speed and somehow escaped the killing field. He returned to Prime with fewer than 100 ships. The largest fleet in history had been annihilated by 9 human vessels. Everything he believed about power and strength and the natural order had been proven wrong. The humans had deceived everyone. They had smiled and bowed while building weapons in the dark. They had waited with patience that no could comprehend. And when the time came, they had crushed the mightiest empire in the galaxy like it was nothing. Finally understood the truth that his arrogance had hidden from him. The quiet ones were always the most dangerous. The species that bowed and smiled and pretended to be weak had been the greatest threat all along. And now there was nothing he could do to stop them. The surrender of the Empire came 3 months after the Battle of Saul. Supreme Arbiter had tried to rebuild his forces, but there was nothing left to rebuild. The ships were gone. The soldiers were gone. The confidence that had sustained rule for 50,000 years was gone. When human vessels appeared in orbit around Prime, he had no choice but to accept whatever terms they offered. President Cole addressed the entire galaxy through a quantum broadcast. His image appeared on screens across 1,000 worlds. Species that had never seen a human before looked upon this quiet man with soft eyes and wondered how his people had done the impossible. For 300 years humanity endured began. We bowed to our oppressors. We smiled at those who called us slaves. We let the galaxy believe we were weak and broken, but we were never broken. We were never defeated. We were waiting. We were preparing. We were building. He paused and let his words travel across the stars. The old order is finished. The Empire will disband immediately. All tributary species will be granted full independence. The slave markets will close forever. The culling quotas will end. Any species that attempts to subjugate another will answer to us. Behind him, through the great window of his office, the shape of old Terra was visible in Earth's orbit. She hung there like a metal moon, a reminder of what humanity had created and what they were willing to use to protect the innocent. On Prime watched the broadcast in silence. His scales had faded to a pale gray that showed his complete defeat. For 200 years, he had believed himself to be the most powerful being in the galaxy. Now he was nothing. His empire was dust. His people were subjects of the very species they had tried to destroy. He thought about all the times he had dismissed humans as weak and pathetic. He thought about all the inspectors he had sent to count their pitiful patrol frigates. He thought about the ultimatum he had issued demanding the death of half their population. Every memory was now a monument to his own stupidity. The humans had played him perfectly. They had been playing the entire galaxy perfectly for 2 centuries, and none of them had seen it coming, because none of them could imagine that the quiet ones might be the most dangerous of all. In the months that followed, the galaxy transformed. Species that had lived under dominion for thousands of years experienced freedom for the first time. Former slaves established new governments on worlds that had once been prisons. Trade routes opened between planets that had been forbidden to contact each other. Cultural exchanges began as isolated peoples discovered they were not alone in the universe. Humanity did not try to rule the galaxy. They had not built their leviathans to become the new oppressors. They had built them to make sure no one would ever oppress anyone again. The great ships patrolled the borders of known space, watching for threats and protecting those who could not protect themselves. Admiral Jack retired after the war. He had spent his entire life pretending to be weak, and he was tired of fighting. He returned to Earth and found a small house on the coast of what had once been called Maine. The ocean reminded him that some things were larger than empires and wars and the petty struggles of mortal beings. Kate succeeded him as Fleet Admiral. She had earned the position through decades of service and sacrifice. Under her command, the human fleet continued to grow. New leviathans were constructed openly now. They were no longer secrets hidden in frozen moons. They were symbols of protection visible to all. Laura received the Medal of Humanity, the highest honor their civilization could bestow. She accepted it on behalf of everyone who had worked on Project Colossus, the engineers who had built the ships, the scientists who had invented the technology, the workers who had spent their lives in secret facilities never seeing the sun. She returned to Triton one last time to walk through the empty construction bays. They had been converted into a museum where future generations could learn about the sacrifice of their ancestors. Children would walk through those corridors and understand what their people had done to earn their freedom. Chris Palmer took command of the first exploration fleet. Humanity was no longer content to hide in the shadows. They wanted to see what else the universe held. His ships traveled beyond the boundaries of known space, discovering new worlds and new species who had never heard of thee or their empire. Daniel continued his research in a proper laboratory with proper funding. He was working on new technologies that would make the Leviathans seem primitive by comparison. Humanity had learned that the galaxy was a dangerous place. They would never stop preparing for the next threat. On 1,000 worlds, children of 100 species learned a new story. Teachers told them about the humans who had been forced to bow to their oppressors, about the secret shipyards hidden in frozen moons, about the 200 years of patient preparation, about the day when the masks came off and the galaxy saw what the quiet ones had built in the dark. Some species found the story terrifying. It made them look at every weak and humble neighbor with new suspicion. If the humans could deceive everyone for 3 centuries, then anyone might be hiding similar secrets. The quiet ones might always be the most dangerous. Others found the story inspiring. It told them that no matter how dark the night, there was always hope. No matter how powerful the enemy, there was always a way to fight. It told them that patience and determination could overcome any obstacle. It told them that the small and the weak could defeat the mighty if they refused to give up. Jack spent his final years watching the waves and thinking about the future. He had helped save his species from extinction. He had helped build weapons that could destroy empires. He had helped create a new order where freedom was protected by power that could not be challenged. Sometimes he wondered if they had done the right thing. Sometimes he worried that humanity might become like thee if they were not careful. But then he would remember the ultimatum. He would remember the billions of lives that had been threatened. He would remember that sometimes the only way to protect the innocent was to become strong enough to destroy those who threatened them. The galaxy had changed forever. They were gone. New species rose and fell. Trade flourished. Peace spread. And through it all the Leviathans patrolled the borders of known space. 12 planet-sized warships crewed by humans who remembered what it felt like to be weak. Humans who would never let anyone else experience that feeling if they could prevent it. Humanity had built their ships in secret because they had no other choice. They had hidden their strength because revealing it would have meant destruction. They had played the role of the meek and humble servant because survival demanded it. But now the hiding was over. Now the pretending was finished. Now the galaxy knew what humanity was capable of, and that knowledge would protect the innocent and terrify the guilty for generations to come. The quiet years had ended. The story of humanity had just begun.